Hey everybody, welcome to Houdini Hangout on the 31st of May. Made it to the end of another month here. We've been chatting about Vellum over the last several weeks, and we're going to continue that tonight, talking about some soft bodies. So in preparing for this stream, to be honest, I probably didn't spend as much time as I would like to, and I'm coming off of another meeting about some USD stuff, so my brain is a little full. So please give me some grace if I lose track of what I'm doing or something like that. My brain's in a couple different places right now, so I'm just trying to sort it all out and make sense of it. But we're going to kind of talk about a few of the different, a couple of the different types of soft bodies that you can create in Vellum. So there's struts, balloons, and tetrahedrals. And so we're going to kind of go through each of those, talk a little bit about what's going on there, how they're made, talk a little bit about the volume preservation that exists in those. Some of them have more localized volume preservation. Some have kind of a global volume preservation, and some don't have it at all. So we'll kind of go through that. And then if there's time, I want to touch a little bit on maybe making some sort of a sim that we can kind of emit a bunch of soft bodies into and just kind of, sort of like we did with our grain simulation. But I think soft bodies are kind of a cool thing to be able to kind of shoot around and, give some velocity to and let them kind of bounce around in a simple environment. So that's kind of the plan for today. Hopefully all the conversations so far have been helpful for you to be able to understand a little bit more about what's going on under the hood with Vellum. And I guess not under the hood of the solver, I should say, but under the hood of some of the attributes and the way that things are set up, what the solver's looking for coming into it. The actual under the hood of the solver, I am not even remotely qualified to talk about. I'll just say it's probably some sort of dark arts in there, and we'll just leave it at that. But other than what's going on inside of it, obviously we want to kind of break down what's, the attributes and things like that are kind of creating the, creating the way that this actual simulation is built and what it does. So from that standpoint, we'll be doing the same kind of thing that we've done the past few times. We should be able to hopefully have a good conversation surrounding all that stuff. Now, for me personally, it's summertime up here in the Northeast. We're really cranking, and let's see, it's 84 right now Fahrenheit, which is quite hot for my neck of the woods. So you'll probably see me sipping on some iced coffee tonight instead of regular the hot variety. But just kind of working my way through it. I also have a fan sitting in my office. So if you're hearing any fan noises or anything like that and you're in chat, just be like, hey, that's really distracting, but I don't hear it. So hopefully we're good. But yeah, so that is that. Hey, Zach, how's it going, man? Welcome to the stream. Hope you're having a good day. All right, well, without any further ado, I guess we will just kind of jump in and start playing around with some soft bodies. So, another thing, just actually real quick before I start. If you are new to Houdini, if you have been here for a while, working in Houdini for a while, if whatever your proficiency is, if you have any thoughts or ideas, comments, anything like that, please put them in the chat. I don't always want this to be a place where I'm just kind of talking. Obviously, there's nobody else that can talk right now, but I'd love for you guys to be able to contribute to the conversation in whatever way you can. So please drop any comments, any thoughts in the chat. If you have a question as to why I did something, you have a question as to, or have a comment as to some way that would be better to do something, I'm always open for those types of things and grateful to hear different ideas and thoughts surrounding these setups and stuff like that. So please feel free to do that. There's never any stupid questions or any stupid comments or anything like that. So please drop those in the chat, and we can address them. Hopefully, if it's something that you're thinking, more than likely other people are thinking the same thing as well, or something similar. So that is my usual caveat. So hopefully from there, let's just dive in, see what we got. So what I'm going to do, like I said, is kind of make, we're just going to kind of create some really simple geometry, nothing crazy here. We're not reinventing the wheel or anything like that. But I want to go through the different types of soft body simulations that exist, and then talk a little bit about some of their volume preservation. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to get into some emission. So first of all, let's make some geometry that we're going to kind of reuse for each of these simulations, so we can kind of have like a baseline that we can work from. So let's just do a geometry node here. I'm going to call this SimGeo. So let's dive inside of there, and we're just going to make some, basic programmer art here. So let's just grab a torus. I don't know. I guess a box is good. Maybe some sort of a, let's see, what else could we do here? Maybe we'll just grab a sphere as well. And primitive, what am I forgetting here? The brain's working well already. Ah, yes, maybe we could grab a tube too. So we're just going to make some random stuff here. So let's just throw this up here. We're just going to have these kind of fall down sort of randomly. So we'll do that. And I kind of want them all to fall more or less into each other. So I'm just going to shift click all these guys here. Just alt click to get a merge. If you don't know that, that is a lovely little trick. So let's maybe put the box. I want them all to sort of fall onto each other. So I'm just going to kind of rotate that a little bit. Let's grab the tube. We'll have that next to kind of fall on top of each other here. Let's put end caps on this. I want this to be a polygon instead. Let's see, we're just going to scale the radius down a little bit, something like that. Maybe we'll just rotate it as thus, something like that. Cool. And then for good measure, we'll just toss the sphere up to the very top. Cool. Actually going to center these even a bit more. I don't want them to be that far off. Let's have them all fall on top of each other, shall we? So I'm just going to let's subdivide this box a little bit more, just like that. Let's give this tube a little bit more, a little more definition. The reason I'm doing this is just more or less the idea of, we need a little bit more geometry if we're going to be deforming these and doing stuff like that. So I want to make sure that we don't have like too few points to be able to kind of make these, actually deform and do some interesting things. So actually, you know what? I'm going to get rid of this tube because I think that cap is going to give us a little bit of funkiness. So let's just do these three and we'll just call it good. Just thinking about how that cap is going to move and do some weird stuff. All right, so let's do that. There we go. Cool. Yeah, that looks good. What I'm going to do is do an assemble here. We're not going to need this for all of them, but this is going to just make a name attribute here, a primitive attribute, and we can use that for one of the soft bodies outputs that we're going to need. So that'll be helpful. I think that's about what we'll need. I'll just, if I need, oops, got typed null. Apparently I typed the wrong thing. Just going to put it out here like so, and let's drop some color on there. Actually, I usually make those green. Don't know why. I think somebody else did that one time, and I just went with it. All right, so we've got some SimGeo here. Let's do a geometry node, and let's first talk about the Strut soft bodies. So let's do Strut soft body like that. And we're going to object merge in that geometry that we just created. So let's just grab that. There it is. Cool. And all right, so we'll just say get SimGeo. And let's do a Vellum configure. And we'll do the Strut soft body. So this is going to be one of those that adds two nodes when we drop it down. What we're going to get first is Vellum cloth, and we've talked about this in a previous stream. This is going to be setting the kind of outer shell of our geometry, right? So this is turning that kind of outer shell of it into a cloth object. Now, the way it's doing that, if we look down here at our constraint geometry, we look at our primitives that are the constraints, we can see that there's a bunch of distance constraints that are made here. There's also bend constraints as well. So this cloth now has distance constraints and bend constraints. However, I'm just remembering one thing that I didn't do that I wanted to do here. I am going to remesh these. Not that it's necessary, but we are going to just do it this way. I'm going to do a star on the hard edges so that it keeps some of our edges relatively... Oh, no, that won't work. Never mind. So we'll just do it like this, a remesh. And let's go maybe 0.15. We want a little more resolution than that. Now we've got a bit more, maybe 1. Cool. All right, so we've got these remeshed grids. It's looking, or remeshed geometry here, looking nice. Just as an example, that's what it looked like before. Now we've got the remesh on it. Maybe that's a little bit too big. We'll kind of play around with this a little bit. Oops, what did I do here? Yeah, can't be 0. That's why. Well, let's just do it at 2. That's fine. Okay, cool. So we've got our geometry here. This will be fairly low res. We can always up it in a second. So that's our geometry that we're working with here. We have our Vellum cloth constraints. We were talking about that. It has the distance and the bend on it, right? So that is going to turn this outer shell into cloth, but we want to have this be a soft body, right? So we want to have some sort of kind of relationship to this internal volume, so it kind of keeps its shape to some extent. And that's where this Vellum struts comes in. So this I'm just going to say initialize cloth and initialize struts, something like that. Just so this is a little more obvious what section these are coming from. So now if we look down here, we have some more distance constraints similar to the cloth. However, these are constructed quite a bit differently. So let's look at, let's just add a null here. It's probably the easiest way to visualize it. And we're going to blast, use a blast node here, and let's just grab the struts and we'll delete non-selected. And I'm just going to template this just so we can kind of see what's going on here. So now inside of this geometry, we have all of these lines that are kind of going from one side to the other to join the two sides together. So what you can think of this as is kind of like springs that are inside of there, more or less, right? They don't have a great understanding kind of what's going on globally across the entire object, but it does connect those points from one side to the other, right? So in this case, the sphere has a bunch of kind of lines that go through it. This cube here is some kind of straight, some diagonal, and kind of crisscrossing across between these kind of straight and diagonal lines. And then the torus inside of it has a bunch of kind of, lines that are going in this more or less kind of looks like almost like a star pattern, but kind of just going along the kind of the width of this torus as it goes around. So these are the kind of constraints that get made when you do a strut soft body. Let's up the resolution of this maybe just a little bit, just to see how much it changes. So there you go. You can see that these struts are not going any further, like a long distance across these. They're kind of going straight across as whatever the most directly across side of this geometry, they're connecting that way. So kind of just tangent from the or an inverted tangent almost from the surface, or sorry, an inverted normal from the surface. So that is more or less what's being created inside of there. But let's take a little bit closer look at maybe some of the attributes that are on here, right? So we have rest length, which anytime you're having a distance constraint, you're going to have something like rest length on it. That's obviously letting the solver know where it wants to try to keep this distance, and the stiffness value is going to drive how hard it can kind of work to keep that rest length intact. So we have rest length and rest length original. I think the rest length will animate as it solves, and then the rest length original will stay. Just a way that you could always obviously reset those if you needed to. The stiffness here is set by the struts. So if we look here at the stretch constraint here under your struts, we can see that this is set at 10 and this is 1, and these are multipliers. So of course, coming out of that, we're going to get 10. There's also the damping ratio that gets set here. So this damping ratio here is set to 0.01. Now, interestingly, looking at the wrong thing there. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. There we go, 0.01. I was like, how is that different? That didn't make any sense. Because we're actually looking here at the cloth. So 0.01, there we go, damping ratio. So really that is about it for these strut constraints. There's nothing really that needs to be an overly complicated setup here. Obviously you could possibly set some other parameters here that would, so maybe something like compression stiffness. We're going to have those set there as well. You can see this is going to be setting your compression stiffness. However, let me do that again. Compression stiffness, we're at 10. If I go down to the blast, there's our compression stiffness. So kind of as we add parameters here, checking these on or off, it's going to add some attributes into our constraint geometry, right? That's where our attributes for these kind of stiffness and bend and things like that live, is on our constraint geometry. Things that are more, kind of geometry dependent are things like the drag, mass, p-scale, things like that. So in this case, p-scale sets the thickness of our geometry. Some of these drags basically change how the air currents might affect it, going either in the normal direction or in a tangent to the surface. Things like that. Those are things that get put onto the actual Vellum geometry. So I'm just going to set a couple things here just so that this is working a little bit more the way I want it to. I'm going to set this here to calculate varying. I find this to be a little bit nicer. I'm going to set the density to, I don't know, maybe 10 for right now. I don't want this mass to be too small. That can end up doing some weird things if we have those masses too small. At least I found. And the other thing I always like to do is turn the edge length down a little bit. Basically what this does is changes the way our thickness is set. So if we look here, we'll see some thickness kind of spheres that show where the thickness of this is. And when it's at the default, it always feels like there's too much collision distance between them, at least in my opinion. Your mileage may vary depending on the scale of what you're working with, but these are fairly large objects here. They're a few meters, but I'm just kind of working in a generalized space here, just a pretty kind of working at default scales of objects and things like that, not going too far into changing scales of things. Anyways, cool. So that is some of the physical, kind of parameters that I like that, I might set when I'm working in here. We can always change the stretch value here. That's going to change how much this kind of outer shell of fabric is going to stretch. Bend, the same thing, how much bend is able to be kind of imparted into this outer shell. The struts, like we had talked about before, they are just internal, and they're going to be from one side to the other. Another thing just to kind of mention here too is there are some other parameters here. Like we could actually add a couple more constraints per point. We can look at some of the differences that happen there. There's also this direction jitter, which can change the direction that these are being set. So you might find some better or worse results from that. You can see there's a slight bit of jitter. There's only one constraint per point by default, and the max strut length is 100. So 100 meters would be the longest strut that would be able to be created. So, we can just keep it at the defaults for right now. We can tweak this and kind of play around with it and see what might work better. So, all right, so let's drop down the Vellum solver. Hopefully that all made sense to you. If you have any questions on some of those attributes, but there's not a ton being made by this strut geometry here. So that's good. All right, so we've got our Vellum solver. Ground position here. So let's add a ground position, and let's just see what's going on. Let's just see what happens. So I'm just going to kind of move this around a little bit. Should solve pretty quickly. Oh, I'm going to unmesh that. Or sorry, untemplate that. You can see here we've got some pretty smushy geometry. It doesn't really bounce back too much. Just kind of falls down, does its thing. They kind of bounce around a little bit, but they don't have too much kind of internal strength. Let's just say there's not really almost like a pressure or anything like that. It's basically just like there's a bunch of springs inside of it that kind of try to bounce back in the direction that they're kind of the normal direction to the surface. At least that's the way we have it set right now. So let's take a look at what this would look like if we upped. I'm going to change the length of this because I don't think we need it to go quite so far. So let's see what happens if we change the stiffness of these internal. Let's go up to 100. Kind of take a look at what that does. So now you'll see that these are quite a bit more. It's funny how it balanced on there. That's kind of crazy. These are quite a bit more stiff. Still have a bit of spring to them, but you can tell that they're kind of just. There's like, especially the cube, you can kind of see it has this jiggle back and forth that's probably being kind of driven back and forth internally. So, obviously as we up this stiffness, we're going to get stiffer and stiffer geometry. And it's not really like the most interesting geometric I like how that's sitting inside of there. That just seems so crazy that that's where it falls. It's not really the most interesting representation of a soft body, but it could be what you want. This could be more or less the type of look that you're going for. So it's got a little bit of bounce, a little bit of give, but not too much. And we're going to do this a couple different times here. But I think what I just want to do is show you how to deform the original geometry from this remeshed representation, because you don't have to remesh it, right? We could turn this off, and this should sim similarly. It's not going to sim exactly the same, but it's still going to have some of the same things going on in it. Let me turn this back down to like 10, just so we can see the softness a little bit more here at play. It's going to do some of its same things, but I think you're going to get a more interesting result if you do end up remeshing some of your stuff in this case. Just keep that in mind that, sometimes it's worth remeshing, and you might think, oh shoot, well then how do I get that back? So let's take a look at that. And that was actually why I had added the name attribute here. So I'm just going to pull this over like this, and we're just going to do a point deform. The mesh we're going to deform is this original sim geometry. The rest points are going to be coming from where the geometry is stationary but is remeshed. So we're going to bring it from there. And then the output is going to be this Vellum geometry here. So we've got that now all kind of controlled that way. The last thing to do here is to add the piece attribute, and that is just going to be name. We're going to drop that in there. The reason for that is that it basically just goes through and it kind of does this capture and deform based on each piece, which is going to give you a much better result, especially if maybe things are close together. This makes sure that you're not getting weights that are from other close by geometry, especially if you change the radius here. You could have deformations that are coming from other geometries, right? So if we have this fall like this, now we're going to get our same mesh, but it's going to be based on this deformation. So for example, if we change our struts back to where they were at like 100, actually I think it was 1,000, and we had those all moving, I think this one ends up right in the middle. Yep. Blunk, just like that. And so now we can get that same representation. So say these were, UV'd or whatever, we could have that same geometric representation right here. And they're going to have the same stiffness. Oh, yeah. Sure. Good question, Zach. So that name is initialized up here in this assemble node. This is going to give us pieces. So piece 0 through 2. So we have 3 pieces. So we have 0, 1, and 2. And that is just a nice quick way of kind of doing, it's kind of like doing a connectivity check and then making a name based on each connectivity attribute. Basically, that would make like class attributes usually, and then you can make a name out of those using kind of a prefix and a number. So here's the prefix piece, whatever, I could do it like that, piece _ 0. And so now when we come back over here, it's still the same because it's still the name attribute. It just changed a little bit. So yeah, that's where it would be. Assemble is a nice little node. You can also get packed geometry from that. So you can name and pack your geometry kind of all in one nice quick step. So yeah, it's a nice node. Good option to use. So that'll just make sure that this is a little bit more more accurate. So another thing too, just to keep in mind, is that if we uncheck this delete capture attributes, we will see that there are actually capture points and capture weights that get created here. So that is how this deform happens. So it creates weights and then deforms based on the weights from the mesh that's moving. So it kind of looks at this mesh and this mesh together, kind of next to each other, and figures out, okay, what points should we be using for those? So in this case, you could go way less. So we could do this way less too. Do something really, really simple and quick. Now this is going to be terrible quality, but you can have way fewer points and still be able to get, some simulation results out of it. You can also do things like, you can kind of change the radius and the number of points that are getting kind of solved together. So if you had a bunch of, if you had a more, if you wanted to average over more points and make it a little bit, more stable, you can do it that way. So there's a few different things you can do in here with the point numbers and also the radius. So if you only want it to go a certain distance or you want to have it search further, it can get more or less that way. So you can kind of use the radius to kind of smooth it over a larger area, or you could keep it the same and have it just look for more points in that and see if it can find some more that it can use to kind of average out those numbers or whatever. You can see here as we go a little bit further, we have more capture points and more capture weights, and I'm seeing that just because I unchecked the delete capture attributes. But anyways, this is a way that you could do that, where you would take your original geometry and kind of connect them together this way. Even with, like I said, with low remeshed geometry. We're going to absolutely need to do this in a little bit. So that's why I'm kind of doing it from that standpoint. So actually, you know what? I'm going to go back to this SimGeo and I'm going to actually up the resolution of this quite a bit. So let's do this like 96 and like 48, something like that. I kind of want this to be really high for some of the later stuff. So this should work just fine. All right. And then let's do this like 96 and I don't know. Just doing some quick math there. Cool. All right, so now those are all quite a bit more dense. Great. This should work exactly the same. Nothing will have changed here. So if we take this same geometry, shouldn't really go any slower. We're not really dealing with too much geometry here. I mean, it's a decent amount of geometry, but nothing too crazy. And there we go. We've got a bunch of, points getting deformed and doing all that stuff. Actually, it was simming at that same point. So yeah, so that's, you can see here now, obviously we have too few, kind of that are too few points on this remeshed simulation that are, it's too rough here. So it's kind of not searching far enough. So if we just give that a little bit more, we can kind of average that out a little bit and it'll become a lot nicer. And there we go. So anyways, a lot of that to kind of just say, there's going to be a step where we talk about the tetrahedrals, where that will be a necessity to kind of remesh and do that stuff. So in this case, it's not. In this case, I'll just crash it from doing that. What the heck? Man, I have been having the worst luck with that recently. I have to look and see if I have something set dumb on my computer. That's frustrating. All right, give me a second. We're loading back in. Yeah. Loading. I do have a new driver. Look at that. Oh, hey, Abby. Yeah, no, thanks so much for watching. Yeah, glad to have you here. The Joy of X thing was really fun. We did that beginning of the year, and it was really cool. It was me and Matt kind of had connected, and he was like, "Yeah, do it." So it was great. Really fun to go through the Joy of X stuff, and I think I learned a lot by doing it. So, okay, we're in business here. We're back. I don't know what that was all about. Okay, we've got our remesh here. We've got our high resolution geometry. It's getting deformed here. We're good. Okay, cool. So that more or less is the idea of the strut system. So just as a refresher, if you missed the beginning part of this, struts are basically just connections that are going to be made in this sort of inverted normal direction inside of it. There was one more thing I wanted to do. I wanted to up the number of connections here to see if there's any difference with that. So let's see how that kind of affects us here. I'm gonna hide other objects and let's take a look here. So the struts, we can have more or less constraints per piece or per point. So let's just up this a little bit and let's turn this back down to 10. I think that's what it originally was at. And let's see what happens here. Okay, let's just compare that versus, all right, let me just get a little thing here. Let me put a camera down and we'll just get a spot for it. That seems good. Okay, cool. Camera, check. All right, let's just flip book this. Cool. And then let's turn this down here. And we'll flip book it again. Boom. Flip book. Let's see what the damages are here. Okay, so let's open up our sequence list here and we'll just look at the difference between these two. So this is the last one we did with more, or this is the one with more, and this is the one with less. So yeah, what I would say is that it kind of sort of feels like there's maybe a little bit more chance for it to kind of expand back out a little bit in some of these here. So that's kind of interesting. Like the sphere doesn't push back out here, so that's kind of curious. But let's also do this. Let's also play around with this. So let's do 3 constraints per point. Let's take a look at what this is doing. So this is adding a lot more inside of there. But let's also give it maybe just a little bit more jitter. So we'll spread it out a little bit more inside of there. So it's not all completely in the normal direction. Let's, I don't know, give it a shot. See what happens here. Playing around a little. All right, let's go back to camera 1. And I'm going to add another sequence here and just let it go. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's some slight differences here. So obviously with these simple geometries, we might not see a huge difference. But, you know, it's worth playing around with and just kind of knowing sort of what those parameters are doing and why they're, what they're kind of creating inside here. And really, again, this is always the thing, is how is it creating these constraints inside of here, and what kind of other configuration that they are, you know, creating this kind of soft body. I don't think this is my favorite soft body option. I think this is kind of the weakest of the 3, but there could be reasons you want them. Want this, and so just good to know. And I'm gonna do some comparisons, I think, between them a little bit differently, just to show how they preserve volume, but I want to just kind of get a feel for what they look like when they're just maybe falling or dropping or whatever. So okay, we have our struts here, so we'll just leave that as it is, and let's kind of continue and keep talking through this. So the other soft body is the balloon. We've talked about this a little bit over you know, I feel like I've done a couple things with the balloon, Vellum balloon stuff, but let's really talk about what it is, if I haven't already, but I don't think I have. All right, so let's do this. Actually, I'm just gonna copy these in because it's gonna be the exact same thing. All right, so we're going to do that. That is interesting how it showed that up there. That was kind of cool. It shows the object paths that it's pasting. Let's give it a little more resolution here. Let's do like 1.5. Cool. Or 0.15. Let's do the Vellum balloon, configure balloon. Again, this is going to be one that's going to drop down 2 nodes. We've talked about this a little bit before, but I'll try to be as concise as I can. So let's do initialize. This is going to initialize the cloth. And then this is going to initialize, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to say pressure. All right, so we have this to initialize our outer cloth. This is going to be really similar to what we did before. There's really nothing more to say about it than this is doing another cloth setup. Let's do calculate varying again and set this to 10. We'll set this to 0.1 just to make sure that we have the same. In fact, I could just grab this. Why don't I do that? Let's do that. There's my initialized cloth. So let's get rid of this. Actually, it can be kind of a fun little way to do this, like that. Cool. Okay, so we have our initialized cloth in here. It's exactly the same as it was in the last one. Set up the same, 10 and 1. Cool. Now we're going to add this pressure into the mix. So let's do a blast node again. Grab this, off of the constraint geometry, and let's grab our pressure. And we're going to delete the non-selected. And let's take a look at what's going on in here. So this is going to be quite a bit different than what we just did previously. The interesting thing here is that this is kind of like a crazy zigzag pattern around the whole thing. I really should ask and find out what the math is behind the pressure constraint construction method. It's a little odd to me. Hold on, I'm just gonna take a beverage break here for a second. So yeah, I don't know where this math comes from, but the one really interesting thing to keep in mind with this is if we look here, we can see that there are 3 primitives. There is one primitive for each of these geometries. So all of these points are all connected into one primitive, right? So if we look at the vertex kind of winding here, we can see that it's, primitive 0, vertex 0, and it goes primitive 0, vertex, I don't know how many vertices are in that, 245. So there's 245 vertices in that one primitive, and it just kind of winds around and does its thing. You know what? I think that's actually, that's really interesting. It's actually looks like it's driven by its point number. That is very curious. I guess that's true. So let me just double check this here. So it should be 510, 511, and then I don't know where 512 is over there. So let's see if that is true or not. Yep. I think that is true, more or less. It's kind of hard to tell because the lines are going everywhere. Yep. Yeah, it looks like it. 512, 511. Interesting. So it's based on the point numbering. So, I wonder if conceivably there'd be a different value there. Anyways, just something interesting that I just noticed. So, hey, there we go. Maybe you learned something along with me. Anyways, so we are, let's turn these off. Okay. So we've got these kind of crazy one primitive kind of multiple vertice setup for these constraints. If we look at this here under the primitives, we can see that a lot of the same things exist here. Rest length, damping ratio, rest vector, which are all just set to 0 basically. And stiffness, pressure. So this type is different. This isn't a distance constraint, it is a pressure constraint. And so the thing I understand about the reasoning behind this is that for these geometries, for this pressure constraint, it is volume conserving, right? So if you take your object and you squish it down on one side, the other side is going to inflate, right? Just like a balloon would. That's the idea. So it's basically trying to keep the volume the same across your object, right? So that's the idea behind these pressure constraints. So that's why they're all one connected primitive. Right, so that's the idea here because it's able to kind of share that information across it. So it can be a little weird then to play around with it. Really, you can only inflate based on individual units, more or less. So there's some weirdness there, sort of. We talked about inflating and doing some things like that in another video. I had something I had made and we kind of talked through it. So that was pretty recently. I want to say that was in like April at some point. So go back and take a look at that if you want some more in-depth stuff about working with these actual pressure constraints. But on this very basic level, there's not a lot going on here, really. There's a few attributes, that we've had before. The type is pressure, and I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to do something like balloon so we can see the difference here between these. So the constraint tag is balloon here. The type is pressure, just so you're not misunderstanding that those are unique. Okay, so let's take a look at how these work and what they do. So these the stiffness value is set here, just like it is in most of the other ones. That's really the only thing, is just this pressure is based on this stretch here. And what we can do is let's do a Vellum solver. Grab those, drag them in there. Cool. And let's take a look at what this sim's like. Position, cool. And let's just let this roll. There we go. We've got some kind of soft, sort of, again, this is an outer shell with an inner pressure that's being created here. So you can see that as you might squish one side of these objects, the other sides are going to try to inflate. So here, as this sphere hits it on the top, this cube, you can see it kind of puffs out to the side. And that's hopefully illustrates a little bit of what's going on here. Now we're going to do something a little bit later to kind of describe that a little bit better. But this is just more or less to see what the look of these is. So that's kind of the most basic, just kind of default setup. Let's add some more. Let's add some more to this. Let's go up to like 1,000 and add some more pressure kind of inside of there. Let's see what happens. So as we add more pressure, we should be able to create these stiffer and stiffer. Now, the other thing that could very well be happening here is I should probably add a couple substeps just to give us a little bit more. I can't believe that balance is on there in some of these. It's so crazy. Okay, cool. So let me set this back actually. Oops, sorry, 100. And I'm actually thinking about this. I think it's actually the rest length scale. This was the one part of this I didn't play around with because I had done it recently. Yep, that's what it's going to be. So I think the higher we set this rest length value or lower, so I think if we do it like this, it's going to kind of be really deflated and saggy now. There's not really any pressure inside of there. And as we scale that up, should have like a stronger pressure there. Yep. Yeah, we can see now that there's definitely some pressure going on inside of that. Let's actually set this up a little higher. Just want to see if that helps us at all. No, I think that's too heavy. Sometimes we've talked about this before. Sometimes just affecting the density can change quite a bit about what's going on with the sim. But here you can see that we now have quite a bit more kind of internal pressure going on there with these balloons. Now, obviously, that's quite a bit. So you might want to do something like, I don't know, 1.3. That'll give you a little bit more of a solid interior there. You can see it kind of puffs up at the very beginning there. But now you can see that these have a much more, kind of solid, pressure inside of it, amount of volume that's being filled. And if we turned this down, let's see how this works. Yeah, so these two kind of stiffness things kind of work in conjunction. So it looks like if we really push the stiffness here, don't think we're going to get any extra like puffing or anything like that. But these should be way more resistant to, collapsing or whatnot. But then if we want to change the rest length scale a little bit, it's going to really puff them up. And now they should pretty much almost like not really deform at all, or just very little bit. They're almost like, like a basketball with inflation now. So these kind of work in conjunction, I think, in a lot of ways from my experience, at least. Mileage may vary, but obviously the more you're going to put into that rest length scale, that's going to add like more, inflation to it, or more or less. And then, from there you can adjust the stiffness of these constraints so they're more or less able to kind of push in and out more, basically. So that's the idea there. Let's do the point deform again. And do the same thing we did last time. Friends messaging me. Should set that. Sorry. So let's just do this here. We'll put in the name attribute, non-namer, name. And again, this should, we should get some deformations here. So the only thing that's a little weird there is we've got some strange puffiness happening. So let's just kind of tweak that a little bit. And there we go. We have original geometry now, kind of deforming the same way that our, that the meshed geometry was working. And obviously each of these different objects is going to kind of, work a little bit differently in regard to how, the bulging will affect it or whatever. But, obviously these are going to all kind of work slightly differently with the way that pressure is going to affect it. So, yeah, that is more or less the idea of the balloon soft body. So let's do now a tetrahedral. And this is going to be a little bit of a different process just because of some recommendations and things like that. Actually, I'm just going to call this tet soft body. No reason to overdo it. All right, so let's get rid of that. We definitely will use this. And so let's get rid of this. We'll use that in a second. So the recommended way of doing this is to first do a poly reduce. Oops, if I can type. Reduce. There we go. So we'll do a poly reduce up here. We're going to give this an output polygon count. Oh, interesting. All right, this is going to be per object. Let's not do that. Well, actually, that's fine. That's fine. Because we're going to remesh it anyways here. So it's not really going to make too big of a difference. But let's do something like that for right now. We're going to keep this pretty low. Because the tetrahedron kind of solve is going to be quite a bit higher overhead, you don't want to go too crazy with this. So you want to give it pretty good, pretty low, even triangulation across them. So you can see here that we're getting a nice remesh there. That's interesting. Actually, the remesh seems a little bit better with the poly reduce. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. But in this case, we're definitely you definitely need to do this at the beginning, and we're going to do the the what is it? Man. Vellum, configure, tetrahedral soft body. It's a long one. All right. So there's two parts that are going to happen here. We're going to have a tet conform, and then we're going to do the Vellum tetrahedral constraints. So let's just do this, and we'll take a look at each of these. I'm just going to rename this as like that. Cool. And I'll drop this into here, and we're going to take a look at what this does particularly. Cool. So this is going to look way different than how it normally does. So I'll try to visualize this the best I can. So we've remeshed this down, and we're going to do this tet conform, right? So what this is going to do is turn this into a tetrahedral mesh. So if we middle click here, we can see now we have 1409 tetrahedrons. Okay. And just as a visualizer, let's do platonic. And this is a tetrahedron, right? So what we're turning this mesh into is we're turning it into something that's being comprised of all tetrahedrons, which is a platonic solid built of all triangles that are, it's a four-sided object, right? So there's three sides here, and then there's one on the bottom. Right. You get me? Obviously, you can turn it any direction you might want to look at it, but that's kind of just the generalized direction that we're looking at. So when we do a tet conform, we're taking our geometry and we're turning it into tetrahedrons. It's going to be comprised completely of tetrahedrons. And so when you look at this, you might think, well, that doesn't literally look any different. It looks exactly the same here. And so you can realize here why the remesh is so important, because otherwise the tet conform can kind of just make tetrahedrons almost any way it tries to from your original mesh. When you polyreduce remesh it to start, you're giving it a solid triangular shape to start basing these tetrahedrons off of. So you can think of you're kind of setting one side of those tetrahedrons on the surface. And so now if we switch into wireframe mode, we get real close. Hopefully you'll be able to see. I don't know how well this will show up on the stream, but inside of here are now a ton of tetrahedron. Actually, if I go inside here, you might be able to see it even better. So now internally, we have tetrahedron that are created. Now, obviously, you can't visualize these in an easy way because it's a bunch of solid things together, right? But now, hopefully, you can start to see how this type of soft body is going to be a little bit different, because whereas the balloon had this global kind of per piece volume preservation, what this is actually going to do is have small these localized areas of volume preservation for each of the tetrahedron. So if we look right here, we can see that there's one tetrahedron that's here, there's one that's down here. It's a little tricky to see. Obviously these are all pretty three-dimensional objects, but there's one there. There's some inside of here that are being created. So there's a whole bunch inside of here. And so it's going to try to keep all of those individual tetrahedron to have their volume preserved, right? So that's going to be one of the main things from this. So if you push on one side of it, it isn't going to specifically result in an effect on the other side, different to how the balloon would have been. So that's something to keep in mind there. So now if we look at this tetrahedral soft body, also interestingly, it sets the density really high, which is fine. Not a huge deal. I'm also going to turn the edge length scale down. Here you can see we're doing preserve volume. There's a couple different ways to do that. I think this is what we want. I don't think there's any reason to do anything different than that. Remember that coming out a couple versions ago, and they were like, yeah, it's just a better way of doing it. Just do it that way. It's probably some paper that someone read and was like, yeah, let's change the way Vellum is solved or whatever. Probably SIGGRAPH paper or something, but sorry, coffee break real quick. All right. So hopefully you're with me on this, on what it's building. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Be happy to answer them, or try to if I can. If I can't, I'll let you know and try to find the answer for you eventually. Also, quick aside. Am I doing this explanation for YouTube videos? I'm not sure what you're asking there. This is streaming. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, glad you found it there, Salaryman. Yeah, yeah, this goes on to YouTube as well. I stream this both to Twitch and YouTube, so whatever your platform of choice is, I'll be there. This stuff all gets saved on YouTube and is much easier to find there. I kind of gave up on trying to clip and save them all on Twitch. Just didn't seem like. Oh, cool. Yeah, great. I'm glad. Yeah, so just to give you guys a little sense of why I'm going through this, I guess I might not have even ever really touched on this. I feel like a lot of times what we find in the computer, like the, CG world, is tutorials that are based on creating a thing, right? Yeah, discoverability on Twitch is very bad. I completely agree. But I've had a lot of discoverability on YouTube, so that's why I'm doing it in both. But I've almost made it to that, like, whatever the partner threshold is on YouTube. I'm pretty happy about that. Like, that's not the goal of these things, but it's kind of cool. I'm like, that's kind of neat. Was never expecting that. Anyways, so the goal of these presentations really is to not talk about, like, hey, here's how you make a squishy thing that looks like this. It's more about talking about what the ideas are that are the underpinning of these different solvers, the attributes that are needed to create these different effects. The outcome is not great. I'm not making something flashy. There's not like going to be a exactly. Yep. The Blender donut. Yep, exactly. That's a great thing. So I'm not. So that was kind of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just say, here's the buttons to press and here's what this blah blah blah. I want to actually look at what it's doing, right? Because wire these together, put it in the Vellum solver, do this, that. It'll make some squishy objects. Cool. But really what's happening, and I said this at the beginning of the stream, like I'm not going to go into what the solver's doing internally. Like if you want to go in here and figure out, wherever it is, probably in here somewhere. Yeah. If you want to go through the Vellum solver, have at it. Like that's above my pay grade. But it certainly is an interesting thing to take a look at as well. That's just not what this is, but to talk about kind of why these things are happening and what's going on. So yeah, that's the idea. But anyways, I'll get back to trying to explain. But yeah, glad you found it, Salaryman. That's awesome. Also, your name reminds me of the Tim and Eric skit called Celery Man. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out because that's awesome. Also, I dropped in the chat a few seconds ago the link to the website, which has a Discord invite and has information about finding us on YouTube or Twitch, vice versa. So if you found us on one and you're like, man, I'd really like to find your YouTube channel, Houdini Hangout, you could easily swap over. I mean, you could search it on YouTube as well, but there's other things on there. There's a calendar with events and things like that. So, or calendar with what I'm going to be going through it. I have it a few weeks out still at this point. So anyways, that's awesome. Well, if you're a fan of Tim and Eric, go check out Celery Man. It's one of my favorites. Anyways, probably showing my age because that has not been on TV in a long time. And in fact, it was on TV, which even says how old it is. All right. So we've created these tetrahedrons, right? And so what this is going to allow us to do is kind of have this option is best for like fleshy kind of simulations, right? So these are going to be really jiggly, very, they're going to have a real, I think this is my favorite of all of them. It's just kind of the most interesting and kind of weird option. So I just find it really interesting. But the reason that when we looked at this blast node too, that it doesn't show that like tetrahedral mesh is because it is showing it. It's just solid. Like you can't, like I'm toggling it here. So we're seeing we're actually seeing the tetrahedrons inside of it, but you can't really visualize it just as lines or anything like that. That's not the default visualization of a tetrahedron in Houdini. Okay. But let's also talk about some of the attributes here because that is part of it. So let's take a look at this here. So we have, these are going to be all, I believe, yep, these are all going to be our tetrahedrons now that are coming through here. So we should have 1408. Yep, there we go. So 0 to 1408. So we have 1409 tetrahedron. And we have things like damping ratio, standard stuff, rest length, the constraint tag, which comes from the name of this node by default, rest vector. In this case, there is actually a 1 in the fourth vector and or the fourth float value there. And the stiffness is at 1,000. If we look at this, there we are, 1 in 1,000. Perfect. Actually, this word just totally, it's just wild name. That's such a weird, like, I'm like, I can't read that. Tetara normal vol. Yeah. So that's weird. Oh, okay. That's what it is. Tet, ARAP, norm vol. That's what it is. Okay, sorry. So, woo, that's a mouthful. So what that's actually saying is the model that we're using here. So if we look at the nonlinear ARAP, whatever, that should be 1 probably, and L vol. Yep. So then this is linear. So this is probably going to say tet ARAP vol. Okay. And then we're going to have scale invariant. So let's see what that looks like. So tet, arap, norm, vol. So there's different options there that are going to be the type. So those are the three different types that get set. So the one really interesting thing here is this rest matrix. I'm not going to expand that all the way. Actually, I could just inspect it. So here's our rest matrix. It's a 3x3 matrix. We're not going to get into matrices and things like that, but just know that this is actually containing information about the orientation, basically, of these tetrahedrons. Or at least that's what I'm assuming. I guess I haven't looked into it that far, but there's definitely some tetrahedral information about the orientation of it, kind of probably scale and things like that as well. But there's some different attributes in there. That's the rest matrix. So I think what that is doing is basically giving it the definition of these tetrahedron, that it knows like, hey, this is where it wants to come back to rest. Like, yeah, it can jiggle around, do its whole thing. That's kind of its rest spot, right? That's where it wants to come back to rest. It also has a rest length as well, but that's kind of the rest matrix is going to have a little bit more to do with how it's actually situated. So, cool. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like when we go through it. So let's do this and do its thing. They're very squishy. So we've got these real jiggly cubes, crazy jiggly. But I really love this like look. I think it's just so wacky looking. Now it's yes. Would it be position, scale, rotation? I don't think that that's what this 3x3 matrix would be. It could be. Yeah, it could be, but sorry. The old brain's a little overloaded right now. I just was literally looking at a matrix visualizer today in a meeting that we were talking about. Yeah, it is like jelly consistency, exactly. So I'm pretty sure that a 3x3 matrix in Houdini is going to be the three axes, like kind of like your like that, like the axes and the scale of them, and that'll be your orientation. I think that's what it's by default, but gosh darn it, my brain is not working right now. So I'm just going to say I don't remember, but it could be. But I think it's the orientation vectors, or the three vectors that make the X, Y, and Z orientation. Yeah, please do. I'm sure there's some good documentation about, I think there's a standard for what a 3x3 matrix and a 4x4 matrix are, because a 4x4 has position in it as well. So that's why I don't think it's scale, rotation, and translation. I think it's just an orientation matrix. So yeah, don't quote me on that, but that's what I think it is. Anyways, yes, it is like a jelly consistency. And again, if you think about something like Jello or whatever, like if you push on one side of it, the other side isn't going to go shooting out, right? It's a locally kind of individual like pockets that there's a distance that it kind of falls off, the influence kind of the when things happen to it physically, how far that propagates through the object. So let's just kind of tweak this a little bit here. Let's up this a little bit more just to make it a little less jelly-like. But yeah, they're still looking a little jelly. And so yeah, we've got two sub-steps here. I feel like if you'd only do one, you're going to get, it's not always going to resolve real nicely. Although that actually did pretty well. Not too bad. So your mileage may vary for how many sub-steps you need. But that's working pretty well, actually. Kind of surprised. Let's do 1,000 and let's just up it to like 2 so this will be 2,000. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, there we go. Cool. That's pretty nice. And then just like we did before, we can use this point to form here to get our regular geometry back in. And there we go. We could have, any type of, UV'd, nice subdivision ready geometry or whatever, get this nice squishy look to it. And everything is gonna come out looking nice and basically the same as what you Yeah, I've seen that before in the past, but it doesn't seem like with this tetrahedral. So Zach is asking if the substeps change the softness, like the squish factor. I'm not seeing that in this tetrahedron version. In some of the other ones, yes, I definitely felt like as I lowered or raised the substeps, you would maybe get a little less compression. So let's keep this low. That's a great question. Let's set this back to 1. In fact, I'm gonna set it to half of what we started with just to really get it super low. So it'll be real squishy, bouncy, so we can see if it really changes in any noticeable way. All right, so there we're at 500. So half of 1,000. Kind of a dumb way to do that, but whatever. All right, let's do like 5 substeps. Let's really crank it. Let's see here. Camera 1. So it'll take a second to go, but shouldn't take too long. It actually looks like it makes it squishier. It's way more ridiculous looking in slow motion. Oh, that's funny. Let me oh, I like that, Beast. Yeah, you pray to the Houdini gods so Houdini doesn't crash. Yeah, I mean, you got to be a little careful with the substeps, but you know, it really shouldn't crash it. I guess the question is what type of simulation it is, because that could maybe depend on how much RAM usage there is and things like that. Let me do a little flipbook here of this. I just want to see the difference here, because I'm actually surprised that it's more with substeps. That's interesting. That's not what I would have expected, so I'm kind of curious about that. Yeah, maybe it's not more. Maybe it's not more. Right, I turned it down. Yep, I did. Let's take a look here. Let's go into this and just A/B it. I mean, yeah, it is a little bit more, but it's not like, yeah, it definitely is squishing in an absurd way. So yeah, so I mean, what we might actually be seeing there is that there might be too much mass being given to these individual pieces, so it's actually able to even squish that harder. So there will be a slight difference, it looks like, with more or less substeps. So, you know, keep that in mind. But, you know, that doesn't mean that one is maybe more. I mean, I guess it's technically. That's a great question, Salaryman. First of all, are you a Houdini user, Salaryman? I'm just curious. I could talk about what kind of PC specs you need. To do this, I don't really think there's a huge spec needed. I would say any gaming kind of modern gaming PC can handle this. Yeah, no problem, Zach. Yeah, that's mass and scale. Yeah, for sure. That's, I think, what's driving all this stuff. Troy just mentioned that. Yeah. So I think this is always, I think with all simulation, it's always a balance of the parameters, right? So how many substeps are, you know, giving you a result that feels good, feels right, and then tweaking your mass and you know, your you know, scale and things like that to make sure that that's being calculated the way, you know, you kind of want it to or whatever. But in this case, we're doing calculate varying for the density. Okay, yeah, I mean 100 might be a little high. I could always probably turn that down. That'll probably be that actually might be a little bit better. But yeah, Salaryman, I'm curious if you're a Houdini user or you just stumbled across this just in general, just like looking at visual effects or whatever. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, so obviously with a lot less mass, we're going to get a lot less. That's a cool question. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I haven't had a lot of people kind of discover this stream just on a general VFX journey, but yeah, I think, I mean, Houdini is certainly for visual effects stuff is kind of, when you're talking about simulation, is one of the industry standards for that. So, I mean, I think if you're interested in visual effects from that standpoint, then yeah, that's yeah. If you have a gaming laptop with 16 gigs of RAM, I mean, you got to be a little careful. You don't want to turn all your specs up to, you know, all your simulations up to 1 million, but you should be okay to get started. It's all about being smart, not putting too much geometry into it. But So yeah, so at this case, without having like a crazy amount of, maybe that mass was too high and that was why we were getting all that smushing, but we're getting some similar looks between, this and it's going to be sort of similar here. It's not as squishy, but they're a little bit closer now that the mass isn't so crazy high. So Zach, that is looking like that was one of the driving factors for that changing. So kind of in a way I didn't expect. So yeah, no problems. But yeah, Salaryman, yeah, definitely. If you or anyone else is interested in learning about Houdini from the start, and this is somehow some way that you found your way here, the learning paths on the Side Effects website is a great way to get started. There's some really good people there that have put up kind of beginning learning paths. Rob McGee has a whole foundation series there that's great, and there's also a really good couple of series. There's one by Nine Between. I think Moeen Saeed is going to be there. So, yeah, it's awesome. I'm glad you found it. Glad you found us here. And yeah, feel free to check out the rest of my content that I've made on YouTube. There's a lot of it on there. So if you like programming, Houdini's a great place to start. If you like modeling and artistic stuff, Blender might be a good option to begin there. So, anyways, so I think hopefully we have these kind of different kind of buckets figured out here. If you have any more questions about maybe why this tetrahedral is looking the way it is versus and with the parameters that are needed, let me know in the chat. Yeah, Beast, that's a great great recommendation. I think that is the Nine Between with Moeen, right? I think that is his series. Houdini Isn't Scary, right? He's also been doing a newer one called Houdini is Hip. Yep. Okay, cool. Good. I'm glad I'm remembering that correctly. He's doing a new one more recently that's a little bit more modern. I'm actually really excited. I'm doing a workshop with him. We're each doing separate workshops in London. So I'm going to get to meet him coming up soon. So I'm really excited about that. But anyways, all right. So let's do kind of a little bit maybe more of an interesting comparison. I'm glad I got through this a little quicker than I was thinking of. If you guys have any more questions about some of these different options here, or like maybe why you might choose one over the other, happy to kind of talk about that, as we kind of go through this. But I'm going to set up another little example here and try to maybe visualize this a little bit better with one a bit more static setup that's going to compress this geometry and kind of see, what is going to happen with it. So let's do that. So we've got these here. We'll just kind of stick these up here for right now. And let's make another geo node, geo container, whatever you want to call it. And let's call this compression. No, sorry. Preservation. All right. So let's go inside of here. Just going to hit escape a couple times. Looks like it's asking me something there. All right. So now let's do something. Let's just grab a box. So we're going to do a box. Let's do a match size. We're going to set this to minimum. Set us on the ground plane here. And I'm going to make this a little bit longer. Let's do maybe like a 3-to-1 ratio here in length. Oh, sorry. That's in the match size, not in the box. Let's do that. 3-to-1. Like so. This match size it does actually have this target size thing here and position and stuff like that. So you can actually scale it to fit within that box. It's really nice. This is a really cool little node to use. So if you haven't used it before, check it out. But we got this box here. We're matching the size, putting it on the ground. Let's just, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of eye this up. We're just going to make some divisions here to make, hello, there we go. Make this sort of square. That's good enough. Cool. All right, so we're going to use this. All right, actually what I'm going to do is let's just do this. 30. I want to make sure this has a lot of resolution, so we're not going to screw anything up here. Cool. All right, great. So if we want to copy it back over, we're good. All right. Actually, we can just remesh it then into some triangles. We're going to give this a decent amount of resolution, like so. That should be good. Great. All right, so we're going to use this as our base, kind of baseline. In fact, I'm going to change this to be 4, like that. So this is going to be our baseline that we're going to kind of compress. We're also going to take a tube, and that's going to push down on this, basically. So I've seen this before, but I think this should hopefully illustrate this pretty well. So let's do a transform here. We're just going to animate that. So I have this tube over here. Look at this. Hit enter to go into the state, the view state here. And let's just change the height a little bit so it's got a little extra length. Maybe we'll do 2.5. We'll add some end caps onto that and give it a couple more segments there. Great. All right, that's looking good. So let's take this from maybe 24 and have it squished down here to 96, and we'll have it go down something like there, maybe. That's a great Beast. That's a great little bit of information, bit of knowledge there. It's awesome. That's cool to hear too. Like, yeah, Houdini really in a lot of ways transformed my VFX journey or my CG journey, because I found myself in a lot of places where I was like, I wanted to really get into technical stuff. And yeah, Houdini, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is killer. Like, just really interesting. And yeah, you can code anything, you can program anything. Also, you can do it a lot more and more in the viewport. And that's something that we've been trying to implement over time more and more. I know that that's a huge thing on the UI UX team, is to, oops, I'm just adding some keyframes in here. It's a big thing on their, mission, is to make Houdini a bit more user-friendly to people that are visual, as well as people that are really technical and want to code everything. So, Houdini doesn't only have to be programmed and coded and stuff. You can actually do some stuff in the viewport. And I just had a bug land on my screen. That's awesome. Get out of here. Go away. Anyways, so we have this box. We're going to push this other thing into it. Let's now do a Vellum struts. Configure strut soft body. My bad. And let's do this. We're going to create that cloth, create the struts. The interesting thing is we could actually probably reuse this Vellum cloth for 2 of them, actually. So let's just call this initialize cloth. The beauty of Houdini, right? The proceduralism. Let's do struts like that. And all right, so we've got the cloth here. That, let's calculate varying. I'm going to set this to be 10 on the density, 0.1 on the uniform thickness. Let's see. So we've got our stiffness and stretch. Yep, that all looks good. So we've got our struts here. They're not super stiff right now. We can always tweak that a little bit as we need to. But let's just leave that as is by default. And let's grab a Vellum solver. Drop it down here. And the other thing I need is to take this collider in. So I'm just going to do a null here just so we can be... if I could type collider. There we go. That's our collision geometry. And I'm just going to put this into our collision geometry input. So now we know that that's our collider. We can kind of keep track of what's going on here. If we look at our Vellum solver, we should see now we have that collider set up. And put the ground position on there. All right. So let's run this and just make sure everything's working. This should hopefully be doing what we want it to. Okay. So we've got something happening here. Let's maybe up the stiffness of our struts. So let's do this to like 100 maybe. Take a look at this. So now we're pushing down on this object. One more thing, sorry. I'm gonna turn this off, hit the little brain icon down there. And let's go down to this. I don't want it to completely crush it. I want to go a little less, maybe to there. That's good. Turn the brain back on. Vellum solver, we're gonna reset it and let it run. See what happens here. There we go, a little more stiff. So there we go. So we're getting this kind of localized compression. Again, remember the struts are like springs that are kind of connecting from one side to another. So this is going to push kind of down into that one section there, but it's not really going to do too much beyond maybe pulling the cloth kind of outer constraints. So I'm going to pull those a little bit, but it's not really going to be... That's awesome, guys. I love this little chat going on here. That's cool. It's always interesting to hear where people's journeys are and where they have come from. That's really cool. Love it. So we're getting this compression in the middle, but the outsides are really not being overly affected by this. So this should be drastically different than what we're going to see when we do the same thing with a balloon constraint. So let's do that. Yeah, exactly. It's like a spring mattress, right? Because we've got springs connected between each other. So when you deform it, there's going to be a little bit of, kind of energy transmission to other parts of the the object, but there's not going to be this overall like, hey, we need to make sure that the internal volume of this stays constant. So let's now do a Vellum balloon. We'll do that. Configure balloon. And I don't actually need this top one, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm just going to wire this in like so. And what we can do here is we could just swap these over. So I'm just going to use Y to cut those. Wow, I said that weird. Sorry. Y to cut those. And now we have our pressure here, which is at 600. And let's take a look at what this is going to do. So we have our balloon here, right? So we've got it sort of weakly inflated. And as we push on it, we should see that the pressure kind of increases. It kind of bulges out in the other places where it's not, being pressed on. So this initially doesn't have enough pressure inside of it. So let's tweak this a little bit. I just want to see if this is actually going. This is like really loose, so I want to see what this does. Yep. Okay. So that's definitely not it. Just want to make sure I wasn't missing something. Let's give it a little bit of pressure here. So we're going to do 1.2 on the rest length scale. This should, maybe too much. Let's do it something like 1.1. Yeah, let's do 1.15. Cool. So now we've got this kind of balloon setup going on here. And as we push down, we're going to see how this really is going to react way differently, right? It hopefully makes sense. I mean, this is exactly the way you'd expect a balloon to behave, but the reasoning behind it is that it's trying to preserve the volume inside of it, right? It's not letting any air out, so it's pushing that finite amount of air, quote unquote, out in these. And if we want the outside of this to not feel maybe so loose like that, we could adjust this cloth, right? So right now we have the stiffness, so it's not going to bend at all or not be stretching too much. But if we wanted to make the stiffness higher in the bend, we can do that because the stiffness is all the way up in the stretch. So it's not going to stretch really at all. The other thing too, actually, is we only have one substep. So that could be affecting this a little bit. So let me actually check that out. Let's just do that. We'll add a substep in here just to make sure what we got going on here. Nah, it's pretty similar, but we'll take a look at it. I think from my standpoint, when you add more substeps, I find it to be a bit more stable more than anything else. So that's really, I think, for stability, sometimes you can up the substeps and get a little bit better final result. Okay, yep. That's wasn't because it was too low on the substeps. That's good to know. All right, so let me up the bend strength here of the cloth, and we can see this look a little thicker, right? So we'll give this outside hopefully a little bit. So now you're going to see that this is not going to be able to just kind of ripple and bend as freely. And so this should have a little bit of a different feel to it. It's not going to be able to, each individual piece isn't going to be able to bend quite as much. So it's not going to feel as loose and kind of ripply. So as you thicken, not thicken, but kind of harden this cloth to bending. So if we take that up to 10, this is going to be quite a bit. Now it's just solid, like sitting solid. It's not able to really bend. And so this is going to be like a really inflexible balloon, I guess you could imagine it from that standpoint. So these are things, that are good to kind of know how to tweak these values to get the properties that you want from them, right? So in this case, if we want to kind of keep that initial shape as best as we can, setting the stiffness on the bend constraint of the cloth is going to actually be kind of important there. So it's something good to keep in mind. And we should see that with the struts as well, we'll see that same behavior. So we can just cut this. If I cut it, there we go. Could actually do a switch here and do some other funny stuff, but yeah, there we go. A little different. Whoa, funky. So it's a slightly different example there, right? But this is what it looked like before, I believe. Let's just take a look here. Hey, Davis, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, so again, there's a whole bunch of different parameters here that can all, be tweaked and changed and stuff like that, but hopefully just good to see some of the differences that can be set here. So we've got our vellum pressure, we've got our struts. Now let's take a look at the tetrahedral mesh. That's going to be a totally different kind of beast here. So what I was mentioning before was the switching. So let's actually do that. Let's just set that up. So let's do a vellum pack. All right, so we have to change this a little bit. I'm just gonna just do this just as an example, just as an exercise. So we're gonna vellum pack. What this is gonna do is pack that geometry together. If you've ever used any packed geometry, it's basically this is making two packed geos and is putting them together on one stream. And what we could do here is we could do a switch now and then do an unpack, vellum unpack. We should be back to where we were. So this is our cloth constraint. Now the collision is different. We're not actually packing that collision into there. So what we would do with that is just stick that in like that. And now we'll be right back to where we were. Cool. And then if we took this switch and just moved it over, that's going to take this packed geometry, put it through the switch, unpack it, and now this will be our inflated balloon looking option here. So just a nice little thing if you're looking to do something like this where you're switching maybe between multiple vellum sims, for example, could be helpful. Okay, cool. So let's do the tetrahedral now. So let's do this vellum tetrahedral. There we go. Okay. So I think we should be able to just go with this. I don't think we'll be in too much, or no, that's going to be probably too high resolution. So we'll make our own little stream here. We can actually move this down as well. Down there like that. Cool. Just trying to stay organized. All right, so let's do a poly reduce since that was what they recommended in the docs, and who am I to argue with the documentation? Let's also do a remesh here. Oh, if you haven't ever used the Labs, is it fast remesh? Yep. The Labs fast remesh, check this out. This one is fun. If you don't have Labs, go install Labs. You can install it through the launcher. And Labs fast remesh is really nice because what it does is it'll actually take something like, say, a really complicated mesh. This isn't it, obviously, but you have a really complicated, like decimated, maybe 3D scanned mesh or something like that. If you throw it through the fast remesher, it's actually going to do some segmentation and basically run each section in parallel and remesh them all and then stitch them back together at the end, basically. So it's really, really cool. It shows you you can visualize the segmentation. It's really, actually, probably could do it here. I mean, it's not gonna be that interesting, but yeah, it's just fun. It's not going to do anything that interesting. But maybe if I do it from up here, maybe it will. No. Anyways, I think it does some fancy math to figure it out. But anyways, it's maybe if I turn this down. Nope. Anyways, it's a great tool. It's way faster if you're doing complicated meshes. So take a look at it. Really nice. For me, your question was, am I self-taught or did I go to school for VFX? I did not go to school for VFX. I went to school for digital design and like 2D not 2D animation, but motion graphics, basically. So design and motion graphics. So I have a background in graphic design. Technically, I have a degree in graphic design, which is really weird. But I always liked the technical stuff. So I then, on my own, did self-learning and, tutorials and courses and things like that. And here I am, I guess, years later. But yeah, that is my personal journey. So we've got a remesh here that's a little lower res than this one, which should be good because we don't want to go too crazy with our tets. This will do a tetrahedral conform. That's great. Here's our Vellum tetrahedral. Great. We can always tweak those stiffnesses. I'm going to grab another Vellum pack here. I'll cut those and shift click. Put those in like that. And we can just run this into second input. And let's take a look at this. Let's see what this does. So this will be our... Oh, I love how squishy these are. It's so fun. So it's a little funky. Got some weirdness going on there. So it's trying to actually preserve... That's interesting. So it's trying to preserve the volume of each of those tetrahedrals. So it's kind of pushing it outwards in a different way. So it's like locally here it's pushing, but these are kind of all staying the same. It's really interesting. That's a really interesting one. Let me just make sure I have this. Oh, the density might be a little higher, and let me turn the edge length scale down a little bit. Sorry, just making sure I'm more or less doing these similar-ish. Okay, cool. Let's try that again. Just want to see where that gets us. Yeah, this might be a little bit better. So it's a little different, right, than the balloon. It's a little different than the struts or the pressure, whatever you want to call it. Different than the struts, different than the pressure. So this one has kind of this tendency of kind of pushing outwards a little bit, but not like the balloon, where the balloon kind of wanted to raise up and kind of keep that internal volume across the entirety of it. This is just going to try to keep its volume in that local space in the middle where it's getting compressed. None of the outside of it is going to be changing at all. So that's really what's happening here with this. So hopefully these visualizations give you a little bit better sense of what's going on here and can help you maybe choose which one you want, right? When you're going to build something in Vellum. And there can be, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. You're like, well, should I do a strut or should I do a balloon or should I do a tetrahedron? So hopefully this gives you some more mental ammunition to kind of make those choices in a more informed way. So the last thing I want to do before we kind of wrap up for the evening is I want to talk about emission, because I think soft bodies can be really fun to kind of emit into a scene. So so let's maybe do that, and we'll kind of wrap it up from there. But we'll make one more little geometry node. And Sailorman, your question about presets. So yeah, there are some presets. Depends on what you're looking for, right? There are these shelf tools up here that help you kind of set up some of these things in different ways. There's also these configure. So whoops, let me just make a geometry. And we'll do last thing, emission. A lot of these simulation things that if you do configure will drop in presets for you. So for example, we've got some Vellum configure. Those are going to kind of set up your objects that you're putting into it to be turned into these Vellum nodes, right? There's also some pyro configure, which are going to be so if I do pyro configure, so these are all going to be some really simple things like bonfire, fireball. So like, you just drop these down, makes the whole network for you real quick. And then you can kind of look and see what you just did. So it makes a, kind of a default setting for like a fireball type situation. And it's simulating it and doing everything there. So these are ways to kind of see what the developers had in mind when they were making these things. So yeah, there are a lot of sort of presets. There's some nodes that help with destruction, like rigid body destruction, that are that help you with creating concrete or glass or wood kind of as starting points for fracturing. So there's a lot of things like that. It can be a bit daunting because there's so many different things, but I recommend kind of starting with one and just kind of focusing on it for a little bit, maybe particle simulations, maybe Vellum to start, something like that, and then kind of move into some of the bigger kind of heavy hitting VFX stuff. All right, so let's grab our pig head. Let's do something a little less kind of developer art, whatever. Okay, so we've got our pig head, and we're going to turn this into let's do a tetrahedral soft body. Vellum. And again, just as a reminder, we're going to the recommended poly reduce. We'll just do a simple little poly reduce there, and then a remesh. That's not happy. I don't like it. Okay, let's turn that off. Let's turn off that. Now we've got our tetrahedral pig head here, right? Cool. Let's bring this up a little bit so that we're yep, modeling is a good starting point. I also think particle sims are a really good way if you want to start understanding some of how simulations work in Houdini. Particle sims are pretty straightforward to learn. I think they're pretty easy. Okay, so we've got a remesh here. That looks fine. So let's drop this into the tet conform. Cool. And there's our tetrahedral. Let's just make sure that this is set up properly by putting down a Vellum solver here. This is going to be a little different than how we end up working with it. But let's just do this at a ground position, and let's drop it. Make sure it's kind of sitting together in some reasonably nice way. Yeah, it's not too bad. Maybe I'll just up the stiffness a little bit here. Let's do 2. Cool. That's looking fun. This is going to be a good one. Okay, well, I hope it is. All right, so if you remember what we did with our grains, that should work the same here. Now this, I'm going to be honest, this is something I didn't test before this, but I think it should work just fine. So we've got our Vellum solver here. It says it needs these first 2, but secret, you can just plug in the that one and it'll still initialize and get ready. Because if that's not connected, it's going to freak out. Now it's not. All right, so let's do a couple nulls here just for reference. So we're going to say geo and constraints like that. So we're going to use those, and we are going to source into this. So let's do this. So let's do a Vellum source. Again, remember we're in DOPS here, so these are some different nodes that you wouldn't normally get in SOPs. So we have Vellum constraints, object, solver, source, constraint properties, and Vellum rest blend. If, just as a kind of complete aside, I would say if you're interested in getting into DOPS a little bit more, I think Vellum is pretty easy to set up actually in DOPS. There's not like a crazy ton of things to do in there. In fact, if you come up to this DOP network here, this is the Vellum solver. Like this is the DOP network for it, right? I mean, yeah, there's the actual solver inside of here, but this is all they have set up. So there's not like a crazy ton of stuff that needs to be set up to get an interesting Vellum solver. This is all of the DOP nodes that they have, except for what we're doing, which is in this little forces subnetwork. So if you're interested in learning more about DOPs and how to set them up, instead of working just completely with SOPs, solving type stuff, Vellum could be a cool place to start. Even though it can be a little complicated, I think there are some good things to be able to kind of glean from its DOP network. I think it's simpler than setting up, say, like a PyroSim or like a FlipSim in a lot of ways. So anyways, cool. So we've got our Vellum source here. This is going to allow us to source geometry in. We're going to grab a SOP path. Let's do this. We're going to do, Emission. So we're going to do geo for that, for our SOP path. So, Beast, it's an interesting comment. I think that working in a DOP network, I mean, let's just be clear that when you put down a SOP, these SOP tools, there's a DOP network inside of them. So it is doing the same thing. So it is more or less creating the same thing. There's not any more abilities in, there's certain things that are baked into these SOP tools, but if you unlocked them, you could get them to do it's all there for you. So it's just, they're creating some guardrails for you, right? In DOPS, you can do whatever you want and you can screw it up however you want, right? So what I'll do a lot of times, I mean, honestly, I haven't been making a lot of DOP networks recently. Now, granted, I'm mostly been working in USD for my daytime job with the education team, but I haven't been making a lot of DOP networks just because so much of what I need to do here on this stream, this is more than capable. I think the biggest thing to understand are the other solvers that exist, right? Like, so yeah, we've got some of these like source nodes and things like that, but what about something like a SOP solver, right? What about a SOP solver? Like we use that a little bit in one of the balloon, in the last balloon Vellum thing that I did. And so knowing how these other SOP solvers work is really important, or like other solvers in here work is important for working in DOPS. I think that's where you get into the more kind of advanced stuff, right? So we've got all these different solvers, right? So there is a Vellum solver, right? But the Vellum solver in the SOP level versus the DOP level, it's the same thing. It's just having those extra levels of control and things like that, right? So is there a wrangle in here? Yeah. So there's geometry wrangles, there's pop wrangles, all these different gas field wrangles, right? So you could write programmatic stuff, in Vex that will actually tweak geometry in a wrangle in a solver, in a DOP network. So that is where the strength of DOP networks and working in there is that you're controlling things as the sim's happening. You're not just kind of setting an attribute and then letting it go. You're actually tweaking things as they go along, right? We could actually go in and adjust the stiffness of these individual like tetrahedrans throughout the course of the sim with a SOP solver, right? With a geometry wrangle, all sorts of different things, right? There's there's many different ways that we could actually go through and adjust these different things. Now, that's not really the scope of this. If you want to see how a SOP solver can work with Vellum, check out the kind of these little this balloon block thing that I did. Like I said, it was in April. I think it was at the end of April. So if you go back a few videos on YouTube, you should be able to find it there. Yeah, so that I think really is the strength of DOPS versus using these kind of prepackaged SOP solvers. So long-winded answer. Hopefully that makes sense. Salaryman, you're asking what my daytime job is. I actually just hit my 1-year anniversary working. I work for Side Effects, and I work on their education team. We work with educators around the world and trainers to help them teach people how to use Houdini better. So that's my day job, which is really fun and super cool. And I feel very honored to be able to be on that team because there's there's only 6 of us for the whole world, but boy do we do a lot of work for the folks around the world. All right, so we have our geo in the SOP path. We have the constraint SOP path set here. So this is going to be now helping us emit into the simulation. No problem. You don't have to, Beast, no problem. You didn't derail me too much from my content. That's the whole reason we're here. We're here to have conversations and chat, and I'll teach along with that. That's the reason this is called Houdini Hangout, and not listen to Peter talk for 2 hours and don't you dare say anything. So I didn't take part in Mardini this year. Actually, Mardini 2021 was kind of what got me started to even think about doing stream, and then kind of moved further and further into this. So I didn't take part in this year, mostly because I don't think I'd get any swag for it. So it's kind of like, I'm not going to kill myself every day. I mean, I work in Houdini every day now anyways. So, so I was kind of like, I think I'm going to take a pass this year. I think I did 1 day for like on the stream or something. I was like screwing around with it, maybe 2 days on the stream, but beyond that, no. I also was traveling a little bit in March, so I was kind of a little busy. Okay, so we've got our Vellum source here. We've got it set to be only once, and the activation is on, so it's going to only once emit into our scene. This is going to look basically the exact same. Blonk, there it is. We could also do each frame. I'm going to hit save because this is going to definitely freak out because it's going to try to be like emitting into itself. So let's just take a look at this, and it's going to get real crazy. Houdini gods, please don't crash. So each frame, this is emitting a new geometry into here, and they're all intersecting, and it's totally freaking out, and that's horrible. So this is just going to be a total mess and not good. I'm not even going to let this finish because, good Lord, what a nightmare. But instead of doing it every frame, let's do something a little more interesting. Let's do the activation as, let's do $F, and then we'll do mod percentage, which is modulo 10. So what this should do is every right. Yep, there we go. So what this modulo, so let's look at this real quick. This is a little kind of Boolean. Shoot, that doesn't get any bigger. Sorry. So we've got $F, which is going to resolve to be the frame number. And the modulo 10 is basically just saying that give me the remainder if you divide it by 10. And so when that is equal to 0, this activation will be true. So that means every 10th frame, this is going to be true. It'll activate. So that's actually too much. Let's do every 20 frames so that we give it some solid time to actually fall. Blunk, 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 blunk. Oh, that's just fun. I just love random emission of soft bodies. So there we go. We're emitting the soft bodies in. So what it's doing is every time, let's just turn this off. You're going to see that like twitch, right? Hopefully you're seeing that in the stream. Yeah. It's kind of twitching every 20 frames, right? So if we were to, let's just say, raise this up a little more. Maybe we'll raise this up to like 4, or sorry, 5. Just give it a little more height. So now what we're going to do is, and what I could actually do, sorry, is I could actually do modulo 10 equals 1. So that should on the first frame activate as true, because what it's doing is it's giving the remainder, right? So if you divide, what is it? The remainder should be 1. Okay, yes, I think that's right. So we're dividing it, and then the remainder is 1. So this is now true on frame 1. So that's why it's going to be active there. So now it'll drop 1 to start, and then we'll go from there. So we'll get a little bit more time with all of these guys. Now we could actually give it a little bit more time to kind of get out of the way, or it takes less time for it to get out of the way. So we could even do something like, I don't know, modulo 15 should still resolve to 1. Cool. And there we go. We're getting some kind of interesting results here. So the other thing that we can do is just give this little extra time to kind of keep going. It's just so ridiculous to watch. I very much enjoy it. Obviously, you can see that the time is slowing down as we're adding in more and more geometry to solve for, but it's not too bad. So yeah, so we're emitting into our solver. So that's kind of cool. But let's maybe do something a little bit more interesting here. So why don't we do something with a little bit of velocity here, something to that effect. So let's do this. Let's do we'll do an attribute adjust vector. We'll set it to V. I'm going to turn on the visualizer just so we can see a little bit better what we got going on here. I think this will flow through. Let me just say random. Oh, that's going to be random for each. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just change this a little bit, because right now what it's doing is it's randomizing it per point. I don't really want it to do that. So let's just do a connectivity. Put this above it. That's going to make a class attribute that will be 0, basically, just for the whole thing. So the whole thing is going to have that. And now it's going to randomize it. We can just do it by custom attribute, and we can just say class. But that needs to be a point attribute. Oh, that's cool. We're also going to change the seed to $F, like so. There we go. Now we got some random velocities going in here. I think that should come through to this point. Let's just check. Yep, still got V. Great. I'm going to turn this off. Also, the visualizer does not need to be on for class. We know that there is a class attribute. Looks like I have some stuck geometry in my... Yep. So sometimes you'll run into this little visual bug here. I'm just going to use my labs tools and just say reset viewport. I'm guessing that's going to take care of it. It will. Great. Okay, so now let's take a look at this here. Now that we have this random velocity on these, not sure how crazy this is going to go. Let's just see. Yep. All right, so I'm going to change this back to 20. I think we're a little too too short on it. I just want to see what this is going to do. Let's see. Maybe from above we'll see what this is going to do. So it's going to throw them in these different random directions, hopefully. Yep. It's kind of throwing them randomly in different directions and orientations and things like that. So that's kind of interesting. Now the other thing we could possibly do here is I think if we use W, we should be able to get some. Ooh, Davis, that's an interesting question. Is there a way to disable collisions for the first couple frames of life? Not that I know of. I'm sure there could be a way to do that with some custom solvers. Like there could possibly be an attribute that you could set. Again, here, this is what it looks like when you're in the geometry spreadsheet changes when you're in a DOP network. Hopefully I'm not covering that up. And you can go in here into your geometry. There might be some sort of attribute in here. Yeah, it might be disable external, might be that. So you'd have to build some like a way to calculate the age of it, right? So you'd have to do some interesting little things there. I don't think there's an age attribute by default in Vellum. Maybe on the solver there is. This is the actual solver. Gosh, it's been a long time since I've looked at this actual solver. You can see the stuff that's being promoted up, right? Here's some of the stuff that's being promoted up. But age, can you age in here? I can't remember. Don't think you can by default. Yeah, so like in a pop network, you can easily age stuff. Maybe pop. So any of the pop things would work on this as well, because this is all point based. So you could probably do. Would this work? Would this give you that? No. I'm trying to think. Could you do it off a point ID? No, a point ID would be so a point ID is only going to would only give you a unique value for a point. So really what you'd want to do it is off of the age and have it increment the age each step of the sim. So it would be a pretty simple thing to write. You'd basically write a little wrangle that would increment the age of the the points that you've sourced by one, basically by maybe a one for each frame. So the age could just be in frames and just be an integer value. So that would be maybe a way to do have it disable its collision with itself and with external stuff for those first couple frames. That certainly would be an option. Would obviously look a little weird maybe, but something you could possibly do. But yeah, anyways. Zach, you asked something as well. Because you're bringing in the geo inside the Vellum solver, does the velocity continuously update during the sim or just recognizes the first frame? No, it should update continuously. If we look at, let me add in a little more velocity here just so it's a little more obvious what it's doing. Let's do 20. Zero-centered random. All right, let's do that. Yeah, I think you can see now that some of them are going in that direction. Some of them are going in this direction. They're kind of going all different directions. So what we should see here is that So if I look at this here and look and template this, right? Hey, there we go. I can see the actual tets. And let's see the velocity. We'll see at each frame what direction this is going to go in. All right, so this one is going to go that direction. Oh, sorry. This one is going to go in that direction, so it should go bloop. The next one is going to come in at 20. Sorry, 21. So this one should go in like kind of a downward direction here. It does. So the next one should come in right there. Again, kind of a downward direction. Yeah, the velocity is going to be carried into it. Yep, for sure. So it's coming each frame when it's sourcing it, it's going to look at the specific velocity that is being put on these points. So a lot of them just happen to be in this direction. I can change this to be, I don't know, plus 23 or something like that. We'll get a different seed number, and hopefully this will just look more obvious from there. So you can see that these are coming out from this and they're going in different directions. So based on what direction this vector is going, it's going to shoot those in those random directions. So yes, it does carry through, not the first frame. It would only recognize the first frame if you were not emitting it and putting it through this first geometry here. Oh, yes, exactly. Yes, it doesn't hold that. That's just its initial velocity. You wouldn't really want that to happen. It's not something you'd want to keep pushing into there, right? Because it could make some really weird stuff. But yeah, no, it just takes that instantaneous velocity and uses that as like the initial nudge in that direction. What I was going to show as well was, I think if you change this to W and do this at like, I'm just going to change the number there so it's got different seed. Let's see what happens here. I think that'll do the angular velocity as well. Maybe. No, I guess not. I was thinking it would. Maybe it doesn't. Okay. Anyways, sorry. Just looking through that. I saw a question that Salaryman asked. Side Effects. Side Effects is the company that makes Houdini, so it's same thing, I guess. Side Effects only makes Houdini. They don't make anything else anymore. But yeah. Anyways, cool. Hopefully, I answered your question, Zach. I think I did. But yeah, if you wanted to add like velocities into the simulation, I would use a pop. Pop, whatever, wind, pop, is there vortex? Pop drag would be another one you could use. Pop spin, no. What's the other one? Oh, there's like a curve force. Sure. No. It's a great question. Honestly, with Vellum, like all of the attributes, it seems like get passed in there. Honestly, there's not a lot that doesn't. Like if we look at like this geometry here in, let's just get a little. Whoa, that's too big. Let's get a little nerdy here. Just look at this big old geometry spreadsheet. Okay, so if we look at what we've got coming in here, this is our geo, right? So these are attributes, right? If we made some random attribute, let's set this to be just the standard foo, and we'll just do this as a random attribute. 0 to 1, sure, whatever. There's our foo. So this should be on our geo when we come out down at the bottom here. So we've got foo here, and this is getting emitted in, right? So let's go into our Vellum solver. Let's go into it, sorry. And we're at the beginning here. If we look, let's see, there's foo right there. So when you're sourcing stuff into a DOP network like this, all of those attributes are going to come in, right? These other attributes are stuff that the solver is making, right? This DP and fallback and has previous, and this is all stuff it's calculating on, like that's helping it calculate. What's the P last, the P previous? That's really weird. That seems weird. Target path. What is the target, the velocity, the V previous, the W, all these different things, right? So those, right. It wouldn't be, because what is happening with these attributes, right? Once they get sourced into DOPS, that is the beauty of DOPS, is that it can then, you're taking it kind of from one context to another, right? So once you've sourced that geometry in, you can then let DOPS do something with it. Now, in this case, this solver doesn't operate on foo. It does not know that that exists. So it has no interest in tweaking that. But if that, say you wanted that to drive something like velocity, or to pulse a velocity, or do something at a certain frame for a point or for an object, you could use that attribute to drive something inside of your sim. It's not going to animate in the sense of you're animating it out here and it's going to animate inside, right? They are disconnected in that sense, right? They're different kind of data streams, at least the way I understand it. And so if you want to tweak something inside of a DOP network, you would use something like a SOP solver, or maybe a wrangle of some sort, to kind of edit that and tweak it. So like if I wanted to do, is there a, yeah, here we go. This will work fine. I think I can use this pop fop. Yep. It's the goofiest name, but let's say I wanted to animate or add to that foo, right? We had foo in here, right? So there's foo. So if I came in here, if I bind in, just like in SOPs, if I bind in foo and I want to increment it, so let's just say add, and there is a time increment, right? So let's just say I wanted to do kind of what I was talking about before. So this is going to be a time increment plus foo, and then we're going to bind export. So this is like super simple stuff, right? So we've got foo being bound in, adding the time increment, outputting foo, right? It's a float value here, float value there. Everything's great. Shouldn't have changed on this. I don't think it should have changed there. Oh, right. If I do that, is that? Just want to see if this. Okay. So it is actually on this first frame, it's doing something. So right now it's adding to that. So let's see what happens now as I do this, right? Because in a normal VOP, if you added something to an attribute, it would add always just that one thing. It's not gonna do anything like incrementally. But we should see that this foo value, I'll just make sure we just see foo. This should continue to go up as the sim goes along. See? In fact, this is now acting like an age, right? So if we look way down here, there's our foos getting their time increments added to them. And they're randomizing and doing their thing. Now, why these lower ones aren't? It's kind of interesting. Not sure why it's doing that. Why some of them are random and some of them aren't. But anyways, so it's going to be adding to it, right? So this is kind of the idea of SOPs versus DOPs, right? SOPs, I think surface operators, right? DOPs, dynamic operators. So that's the idea there, is that that data can kind of exist in two separate places, and you can tweak it different ways in each network. So there's kind of this constant, like this persistence of things happening, like where each frame cycles back into itself in DOPS, whereas in SOPs, it just happens kind of globally. To have something like an accumulation solver is actually a dynamics thing that happens in SOPs. Like if you have some sort of tool that does like accumulation for you, that is actually some sort of a DOP implementation in and out from SOPs into DOPS back to SOPs. Sorry, a lot of op words there. But anyways, yeah, hopefully that kind of answers your question, but that is sort of gives you a little glimpse into it. Exactly. Yep. 100%. Yes, you could do that. In fact, yeah, you could definitely do that. Yeah, it'd be really weird in this case what it would do, but yes, you could certainly do that. And that what I would do is, and I think I did this. Gosh, I'm trying to think of when I was doing this, because I definitely did this on the stream. I think it was in one of the last Vellum things that. Sorry, just trying to think. Where you had static geometry that we were animating on, and we used a SOP solver to bring it in. Yes, I think there was I think one of the earlier of these like kind of Vellum chats that I was doing, I think touched on that. It might have been the cloth one. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was the cloth one. And so you could do something where you'd be animating an attribute in SOPs, and then you could bring that into DOPS and use that value of whatever the attribute is to kind of tweak how the rest length might be going in there. There's so many different ways that you could do that, but yes, that's 100% what you could do. And you could make them grow over time. You could use the foo as an age, and you could target something like when an age, say this was age in this case, when age got past a certain value, okay, now trigger this thing. Age gets past 2, okay, now we're going to break this constraint. Totally doable. Now you'd need to be doing that on the constraint geometry, which is right here, and not on the actual geometry. So that would be something important to note. You wouldn't be, sorry, foo doesn't exist there. So this is our constraint geometry. This is our regular geometry. Just important to know that there are different geometry streams. Also, collision geometry, totally separate stream as well. So these are all important things to know, that DOPS deals with data a lot differently than SOPs does. So it's just good to kind of understand what's going on there. So Davis, you asked a question. Is there a shortcut to full screen maximize a window in Houdini? Yes, there is. It is Control B. Yeah, there you go. Boop. It's this little button right here, but it says Alt. Yeah, or Alt, single bracket, single notch, whatever. So yeah. Anyways, that is a bit of a tangent that I wasn't expecting to go on, but hey, that's what we're here for. Have tangents and have good conversations. So hopefully that that'll answer some of your questions that you had in there. If anybody else has any questions on this, I'd be happy to talk about that before we sign off for the day. But if not, we'll kind of move on, and I'll just kind of wrap things up. Yeah, no problem, Zach. Thanks for your questions. I always appreciate any questions that anyone has. Love it. So unless we have any more questions, I'm just going to kind of wrap things up a little bit here. Salaryman, you asked what YouTube channel can I recommend for beginner content? Let's see. I think someone mentioned that 9 Between, they have one called Houdini Isn't Scary, which is good. I would definitely check out that. I didn't watch that to start with because that stuff that didn't exist when I started, but I've heard it's great. There is also, if you go to the sideeffects.com website and go to learning paths, pause, hold on, I will tell you in a second what it is. Let's see here, sideeffects.com. Let's see, what are we looking at here? So if you go to the website here and go to learning paths, getting started, this is a great collection of stuff. Highly recommend it. Foundations, super good, done by Rob, who literally wrote the Foundations book, which is right here. You can also get a copy of that if you wanted to, either digitally or you could buy a print one. The digital one's free. The print one, obviously, you have to pay for. But here's the basic stuff. There's a whole bunch of things here. This is from Intagma. Those guys are awesome. Rohan Dalvi, Moeen Saeed. This is 9 Between. This is one of the guys that we were talking about. He also does. He did the one Houdini Isn't Scary. Tyler CG Forge. He's got some great like paid stuff. So there's a lot of people that make some really good paid content. If you want to just see musings of someone that's just kind of going through and playing around in Houdini, CG Wiki's awesome. Matt is super smart, and it makes these really great little like bite-size like tutorials on there. They're text, a lot of them, but have awesome GIFs and things like that. So yeah, these are all really cool. Then there's some project-based stuff down here as well. Yeah, check it out. And if you're coming from another software package, there's always these at the bottom here, but it doesn't sound like you are. So there's also other learning paths as well. Tons of interesting things here. Check it out. Really cool stuff. Learn from the experts. Steve Nipping, that's one of the guys that I learned a lot of stuff from when I first started. So really good stuff. Anyways, yeah, so I think that's kind of where we're going to wrap this up for today. You're very welcome for the guidance. Yeah, happy to help. Also, there's a couple Discord communities out there. I have a Discord that I set up just so people can communicate if they'd like to, with maybe a little less noise, but there's other like public Discord servers where people are usually more than happy to help you out and give you some feedback and advice and things like that. So recommend those as well. But that's going to wrap us up for tonight. Really great conversation. Thank you guys so much for kind of being a part of this. I always love it when people have questions and comments and all sorts of things. So if you ever feel like you're like, oh, I don't want to ask that stupid question, please do, because it makes it so much fun. I really enjoy it. But that's, like I said, where we will think procedural. Yes, that is the Discord server. Yes, check it out. It's good stuff. Lots of conversations there. So if you really want to just dive in like crazy, some good conversations there. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining. Check out the website for the other for the upcoming schedule. I've got a couple. There's going to be 2 weeks where I'm going to be out of town, so that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks here. So keep an eye out for that. I will probably mention it briefly on Twitter and some other social stuff. But if you're like, where'd the Houdini Hangout stuff go? I will be gone for a couple weeks. So for 2 Wednesdays. So just be mindful of that. So there's a little gap in the schedule you'll see there. But anyways, again, thanks for joining, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.